With his elastic expressions, limber physicality, and timeless comedic brilliance, Dick Van Dyke has enchanted audiences for nearly a century. From dancing across rooftops as Bert and Mary Poppins to stumbling over ottomans as Rob Petrie, Van Dyke's warmth and charisma have made him a beloved icon. Yet, at 98, with a career spanning 8 decades, he's begun to reveal the complexities behind his radiant smile. Beneath the polished persona of the quintessential nice guy lies an artist with fierce convictions about comedy, professionalism, and integrity. While Van Dyke's public image radiates joy, he occasionally clashed with those whose approaches diverged from his values. These tensions weren't fueled by ego, but by a deep commitment to uplifting, inclusive entertainment. As he reflects on a life in show business, Van Dyke has shared glimpses of the creative disputes, professional frustrations, and personal challenges that shaped his journey without ever defining it. Here are the 6 figures who tested the limits of his legendary affability, revealing the resolute artist beneath the song and dance. Even a performer as celebrated as Dick Van Dyke isn't immune to the sting of criticism. In 1961, as The Dick Van Dyke Show struggled to find its audience, a prominent but unnamed television critic published a scathing review that left a rare, enduring mark on Van Dyke. The critic dismissed him as charming but insubstantial, suggesting he lacked the depth to anchor a series. For Van Dyke, who had transitioned from radio to Broadway to television with relentless dedication, this critique struck at his core fear that his wholesome comedy might be mistaken for shallowness. That review hit him hard. A writer from the show recalled, "We were still figuring out the show. Ratings were shaky, and Dick was pouring everything into making it work. To be called forgettable at that moment, it hurt." What's remarkable is how this single review lingered in Van Dyke's memory, even as his career soared with Emmys and iconic roles. In his 2011 memoir, My Lucky Life in and Out of Show Business, he wrote, "Most reviews fade, but that one stuck with me. I still think about what that critic might say now." A producer who knew him in the 1990s recalled a moment at an industry event when the critic's name surfaced. Van Dyke's smile tightened briefly as he said, "Well, I suppose we showed him, didn't we?" It wasn't bitterness, but a quiet resolve. The critique challenged Van Dyke's deliberate choice to prioritize accessible, heartfelt humor over edgier fare, and its dismissal of that choice felt like a misunderstanding of his art. Yet the triumph of the Dick Van Dyke Show, now a cornerstone of television history, proved his approach was anything but lightweight, revealing a man whose sunny demeanor masked a steely commitment to his craft. In 1964, Dick Van Dyke and Walter Matthau shared the stage in a Los Angeles comedy production, a pairing that promised brilliance but delivered tension. Van Dyke's boundless energy and meticulous preparation contrasted sharply with Mathau's sardonic, improvisational style. Their brief collaboration highlighted the limits of Van Dyke's patience and underscored his deep-rooted beliefs about comedic discipline. They were like night and day, a stagehand recalled. Dick was early, enthusiastic, and precise. Walter rolled in late, muttering complaints, with a cynicism that seemed to baffle Dick's optimism. The friction stemmed from their divergent approaches to comedy. Van Dyke's carefully choreographed timing clashed with Mathau's spontaneous, unpredictable delivery. Matthau, in turn, seemed skeptical of Van Dyke's relentless positivity, reportedly joking about it during rehearsals. "I saw Dick backstage once looking unusually drained," a costume designer shared. He said, "Walter's a genius, but he's exhausting. I never know what scene we're doing." It wasn't anger, just frustration. The tension peaked during a key comedic scene when Mathau's constant deviations threw off Van Dyke's rhythm. After several takes, Van Dyke quietly asked the director to standardize the scene's delivery. "It wasn't a diva moment," the stagehand noted. For Dick, it was about professionalism. Asking for consistency was his version of drawing a line. The production succeeded, with reviews praising the contrast between their styles, but the two never worked together again, a mutual choice reflecting their incompatible approaches. Van Dyke later described such experiences diplomatically. Some performers thrive on chaos. I've always preferred collaboration and clarity. This clash illuminated Van Dyke's belief that comedy shines brightest when built on trust and precision, not unpredictability. The Dick Van Dyke Show is now hailed as a sitcom masterpiece, but its early days were marked by a tense battle between Van Dyke's creative vision and CBS executives' commercial concerns. When the show debuted in 1961, its sophisticated blend of workplace and family humor set it apart from broader sitcoms. However, lackluster initial ratings prompted network pressure for changes, more slapstick, simpler gags, and a more traditional, bumbling dad role for Van Dyke's Rob Petrie. They thought Middle America wouldn't get it, a writer from the first season recalled. They wanted Dick to lean into exaggerated comedy, which felt like a betrayal of the show's nuanced tone. For Van Dyke, these suggestions were personal. They challenged his belief in intelligent, relatable humor. In one meeting, an executive proposed a recurring catchphrase and gesture to punch up Van Dyke's character. Dick just looked at him, a production assistant remembered, and said that would undermine the whole show. It was polite, but firm, and the room went silent. The stakes escalated when CBS considered canceling the show after its first season. Van Dyke, alongside creator Carl Reiner and producer Sheldon Leonard, fought fiercely to preserve its integrity, with Van Dyke even threatening to walk away. "He meant it," a colleague said. "He told them, 'I'd rather not do it than do it wrong.' That was bold for a family man at that stage." Thanks to Leonard's advocacy, CBS relented, and the show's renewal led to 5 acclaimed seasons and 15 Emmys. Van Dyke later reflected, "We nearly lost something special because it wasn't an instant hit. I'm proud we stood our ground." This battle revealed a resolute artist willing to risk his career for his principles, proving that his affable exterior hid a core of unwavering conviction. The on-screen chemistry between Dick Van Dyke and Julie Andrews in Mary Poppins, 1964, feels effortless, their jolly holiday sequence a pinnacle of cinematic joy. Yet, behind the scenes, their relationship was more professional than personal, marked by subtle tensions rooted in their contrasting performance styles. They respected each other's talent immensely, a crew member noted, but they never quite clicked off camera the way audiences imagined. Andrews, with her classical training and vocal precision, approached the musical numbers with technical mastery. Van Dyke, self-taught and rooted in physical comedy, brought a looser, more intuitive energy. During rehearsals, Andrews occasionally seemed unsettled by Van Dyke's improvisational flourishes, while he felt daunted by her flawless technique. "I overheard Dick joking about Julie being practically perfect," an assistant choreographer recalled. "It was lighthearted, but you could tell her precision made him self-conscious." The dynamic was further strained by Van Dyke's dual roles as Bert and Mr. Dawes Sr., which gave him a broader showcase compared to Andrews' singular role as Mary Poppins. Though Andrews remained professional, some crew sensed her quiet frustration. Director Robert Stevenson mitigated potential issues by filming their key scenes early, ensuring their on-screen magic remained intact. The result was a film that feels seamless, with no hint of the careful management behind it. Years later, at Mary Poppins events, Van Dyke and Andrews maintained warm public interactions, but their personal connection remained distant. "Julie's a phenomenal talent," Van Dyke once said. "We had different paths to the same goal." This professionalism underscores Van Dyke's commitment to the audience's experience, prioritizing the film's magic over any personal disconnect. As comedy evolved, Dick Van Dyke observed the rise of performers like Jim Carrey, whose frenetic, exaggerated style in the 1990s contrasted sharply with Van Dyke's measured, character-driven humor. While never publicly critical, Van Dyke privately expressed unease about Carey's approach, highlighting a philosophical divide. Dick admired Jim's physicality, a friend shared, but he'd say he's working too hard to be funny, instead of letting it flow naturally. It wasn't envy, just a different view of comedy. Van Dyke, whose humor always served the story, felt Carey's over-the-top antics prioritized shock over relatability, distancing audiences from the human connection he valued. I asked Dick about Jim once, a 1990s TV director recalled. He said, comedy should come from truth, not excess. It was like watching a master question where his art was headed. This divide surfaced when both were considered for a late 1990s comedy film. Van Dyke opted out, citing incompatible styles. It wasn't personal. He'd never met Jim, an associate clarified. Dick just felt their approaches wouldn't blend. Both performers shared extraordinary physical talent, but their public images, Van Dyke's warmth versus Carey's intensity, defined their differences. As Carey later embraced more nuanced roles and Van Dyke reflected on comedy's evolution, the gap narrowed, but the contrast revealed Van Dyke's belief that enduring humor stems from universal truths, not exaggerated spectacle. No relationship shaped Dick Van Dyke's career more than his collaboration with Reiner, the visionary behind The Dick Van Dyke Show. Their partnership produced a sitcom masterpiece but was marked by creative friction rooted in differing comedic philosophies. Reiner, a boundary-pushing writer, initially created the show for himself but recast Van Dyke after a failed pilot. Carl wanted real-life humor, sometimes with an edge, a writer explained. Dick wanted authenticity too, but with a warmer, more family-friendly tone. These differences led to frequent script discussions. Van Dyke, wary of content that felt too risque, would gently question lines or scenarios, while Reiner defended their relevance. They never fought, a script supervisor noted. Dick would say, maybe this is a bit much, and Carl would explain his vision. Their balance made the show special. One recurring debate involved Rob Petrie's drinking. Reiner leaned into realistic adult behavior, while Van Dyke, mindful of the audience, pushed for moderation. Similarly, Reiner wanted to hint at Rob and Laura's intimacy, while Van Dyke favored subtlety. Carl liked to push. I like to keep it warm, Van Dyke later said, acknowledging their dynamic. Their mutual respect, Reiner valuing Van Dyke's likability, Van Dyke trusting Reiner's genius, kept tensions productive. When Reiner died in 2020, Van Dyke's tribute was poignant. Carl's brilliance was matched by his openness to collaboration, even when we disagreed. This partnership, defined by creative push and pull, underscores how Van Dyke's principles shaped one of TV's greatest achievements. Across these 6 relationships, a clear pattern emerges. Van Dyke's tensions were rooted in his unwavering commitment to uplifting, authentic comedy. His clashes with Matthau, Andrews, or CBS executives weren't about ego, but about protecting his vision of disciplined, relatable entertainment. His reservations about Carey reflected concern for comedy's human connection, while his debates with Reiner balanced warmth with innovation. Dick's guided by a belief that entertainment should inspire, not divide, a longtime collaborator observed. When that was challenged, you saw his resolve. Unlike many stars, Van Dyke's conflicts were professional, not personal, allowing him to maintain his sterling reputation. His approach, prioritizing preparation, accessibility, and optimism, kept him relevant across generations, adapting without abandoning his core values. At 98, Dick Van Dyke's career is a testament to talent and integrity. His rare conflicts reveal not flaws, but a steadfast commitment to his art. What's remarkable isn't that Dick had tensions, a colleague noted, but how he handled them, with grace, focusing on the work, not grudges. While others succumbed to bitterness or faded, Van Dyke's principled approach kept him beloved. His willingness to share these stories as he nears 100 adds depth to his legacy, showing that his joy was a choice, often made despite challenges. The man who made comedy look effortless, worked tirelessly to uphold his values, proving that true. Entertainers don't avoid conflict but navigate it with dignity. If this deeper look at Van Dyke's journey resonates, like and subscribe to Legacy News for more stories about the humanity behind your favorite stars. Share in the comments which of Van Dyke's principles inspires you most, or suggest other icons whose stories you'd love explored. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. If this deeper look at Dick Van Dyke's life inspired you, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps more people discover these untold Hollywood stories. Make sure you subscribe to Legacy News and turn on the bell so you never miss our deep dives into the legends of film and television. And we'd love to hear from you. Which part of Van Dyke's journey surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And let's keep the conversation going. See you in the next video.